Hey guys, and welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today, Ash and myself are discussing what we class as the perfect athlete. We had a little bit of not a heated discussion, because I think we kind of come to a bit of a similar understanding towards the end, but what is the perfect athlete to you? And I think there's a lot of people that start discussing, oh, I want to be like an athlete, train like an athlete, but the understanding that anyone that kind of is a sportsman or sportswoman, like a sports person of any degree, means that they're an athlete, especially if they're competitive. So, okay, do you want to be, say, the best? Do you want to be trained like a gymnast? Do you want to train like a golfer? Do you want to train like a cyclist? They're all going to train slightly differently. So what would be the perfect athlete in your eyes?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and there is no right answer for everyone. It basically comes down to personal preference and having an idea of what your ideals are. I think some people aspire to be like Matt Fraser or Tia Claire Toomey, like a CrossFitter is generally perceived to be well-rounded in all different types of fitness. But then other people might want to be Usain Bolt and just be the fastest man in the world, because that's pretty fucking cool. I think me growing up, rugby was my main sport, so I always looked up to, the rugby greats of people like, Jonah Lomu as like a amazing ball carrier, but then also Johnny Wilkinson and Dan Carter, because they've got a lot more skills, arguably, to go with their athleticism as well. And I still haven't verified it, but I think Johnny Wilkinson could do 2 or 3 one-arm pull-ups, so that's the reason why he gets my vote. There's a guy actually Pete made me aware of on Instagram called Matt Healy, who was a regionals athlete in CrossFit and is now sort of spun off to do his own style of training. And he, at the moment, is probably my favourite fitness idol, in that he can do multiple reps of one-arm chin-ups, one-arm pull-ups. He can also run like about 11-second 100 meters. He could snatch 110. And in terms of a set of discrete skills that he's performing at a very, very high level, I think that's pretty cool. So for me, I think that's sort of where my respect goes most. And if I could have the output of somebody, he'd be right there.
He is pretty cool. I know when we touched on this before, but I think my ideal athlete is definitely, when you look at, say, the top CrossFitters, like, as you say, like the Matt Frasers, Tias, and stuff like that, they just so well rounded, and I think being able to do pretty much anything they get asked to, I think is amazing. However, I do have to say, I always have this tendency to love rugby league players, because for me, they're just, not only are they strong, they're mentally strong, they're fast, because the thing with rugby league, it's a lot faster than union, say. It's a lot more pick up and go, run, and with the simplicity of the sport to a degree, right? But with the simplicity of it, it's you're running at another team and try and get as far as you can, and it's just so intense that you're physically fit, as I said, physically strong, all these attributes, and normally you're like a big lad, that kind of like appeals to me, since I'm like, the 100-kilo range. So I can relate to a lot of these like big, say, props or like forwards and stuff like that in rugby league. And it wasn't until one of my friends, Luke, got me into it, and we just went to, I think it was like a walkabout, and we watched the State of Origin.
Yeah.
So that's obviously like 2 of the biggest teams in, like 2 of the sides in Australia, so New South Wales and Queensland. And every year is basically a 3-game playoff. And I'd never experienced rugby league until I saw that. And so obviously I'm seeing the pinnacle essentially of the sport, bar the World Cup, but pretty much that's, I'd say, the most physical, fastest game. And there's so much aggression.
Yeah.
And for me, it amazes me. You can have someone that can run at someone as hard as, and these are big lads. So they say like it's equivalent to car crashes, right? So you're running at someone, the sheer power of 2 humans colliding with each other. They go down, they play the ball, get up and do it again.
Yeah.
And people like, Sonny Bill, for me, he's always been like he's like an athlete for all the things that he's kind of delved in. Not only has he done league, union. He's done some boxing and some other stuff. It's like, for me, he also still looks good. And, you know, he's a family man. I know he's like a man of religion as well. But, you know, he's such a well-rounded athlete. He got criticised a little bit for obviously jumping codes and changing sports and stuff, but that's an athlete. Now, but if you then put someone like, say, Matt Fraser on a rugby league field, obviously you'd put him in the right position and say to make him be able to play. But I think he'd be able to hold his own to a degree. But I don't know. I think the physicality is what gets it for me, and that's like, for me, I see as the perfect athlete. Yeah. But I guess, you know, when you talk about if it goes beyond the physical preparedness of the individual, and you then start saying, okay, what about if you're just the best, say, man, or like in our case, or say best female? Like, I know we touched on, what about like an MMA fighter? Yeah, that's someone which, you know, would be able to take out pretty much any rugby league player, and they could be like twice the size of them. Look at someone like Conor McGregor could take out, say, like Sam Burgess is like, say, 100 kilos or something like that, and just because he knows how to put him. So that's where you got to prioritize. Okay, what am I thinking as an athlete compared to, you know, the fit, like I'm casting my physical athlete as a rugby league.
I think that's it. I think there's something quite primal about combat. So rugby has a greater element of combat than fitness or a lot of other sports, and then MMA's got an even greater degree of combat, because it is very close to just put two people through. And I think there's something that's just deep rooted in the human condition, that everyone wants to know who would win in a fight, kind of thing. And it's how many layers away from that are you? Sport's kind of a simulation of that. Like rugby, obviously there's a lot of components where there's speed, power, strength, agility, and then you can extract away from that down to, say, Usain Bolt, I'm just faster than you. That's
so he can run away the quickest.
And I think it's a great question. It's a good question about CrossFit. I think when you talk about the general physical preparedness and being an all-rounder versus a specialist, and I think a lot of people think that general physical preparedness is the best way to become better at any sport, which I personally believe is misinformation. And it's called general physical preparedness because it's general. So you are building broad skills across the board rather than something specific. And we were laughing about it earlier when I got an advert on Instagram for a golf WOD program. Sorry to call them out, I didn't mean to do that. Maybe we'll edit it out. But they basically were selling a strength and conditioning program to promising to get people to hit the ball further and perform better at golf. And I had a look into it, and it's essentially just CrossFit. There's not any level of tailoring towards the sport of golf, no specificity. There were zero movements that had any level of rotation, and golf is a sport which is all about the transverse plane. It's all about that twist as you hit the ball. That's where all the power comes from. And I see what they're doing in that there's a bit of a buzz in golf at the moment because there's a player called Bryson DeChambeau who spent a lot of time and effort getting bigger and stronger, is now hitting the ball a lot further, but he didn't do CrossFit. He had a trainer who had a good understanding of biomechanics and got him stronger in a way that carries over to golf. And this company are essentially claiming that any sort of training will get you stronger and any sort of strength will make you better at golf. And if your base is very low, that's true to a point, but it's not golf specific strength training. And I think that's something that's a attitude in the fitness industry, which is reasonably pervasive, that strength and conditioning will make you better at everything, when actually that's not necessarily true. And there is an opportunity cost, and in some instances it can be detrimental to certain sporting performances.
So just to give listeners that even if they do CrossFit, but they may not fully know the 10 general physical skills. So what are they? I know obviously I don't want to miss any out, so you've got them written down. So
well, up here, so we've got cardiovascular or respiratory endurance and stamina. So that's distinct in that cardiovascular endurance is the ability of the body systems to gather, process, and deliver oxygen, whereas stamina is the ability of body systems to process, deliver, store, and utilize energy. It's interesting they've sort of drawn those out as distinct. But then the next ones are strength, flexibility, power, speed, coordination, agility, balance, and accuracy. So yeah, a nice spectrum.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. Got a nice broad bunch of physical skills, and as a CrossFitter or someone that likes to train in a functional way, that's a great way, as you say, to be generally prepared for everything that life may have to throw at you. Which is why you got CrossFitters, when they compete at the highest level at the games, they can pretty much be given any task and they are quite quick to adapt. They see, cool, what can I do that I may have done something similar before that carries over? And I think, okay, cool, you need to say, when they introduced the assault course. So and then the next years they got them climbing up rope ladder essentially and down the other side, and it's just like those type of things. It's not just like climbing a rope ladder has a complete different element to it, and it's and just shows how quickly they adapt. Because when you saw one of the assault courses in one of the years, it was like knockout stages. And you just see how they're getting faster and faster because that's the skill of, a CrossFitter, the adaptation. Obviously, anyone in general is the more you do something, the better you're going to get it. But it just shows that in a short window, these were under a minute at a time. These were fast sprints, and they pretty much had to go again not too long after. So it's such a short turnover. They've got improved because as a general athlete, they're amazing. And that's the thing. They might have, so you've got people like Dan Bailey, who was a sprinter. You got Matt Fraser, who was a weightlifter. So you're all these tier class weightlifters, been at Olympics, stuff like that. So you've got these athletes that have got specialities in certain areas, but they're also so good at everything else that those that haven't necessarily had to focus so much time. Like, as I know in one of the Matt Fraser documentaries or something like that, and he says how he spent his whole basically childhood into his early teenage years doing weightlifting, whereas everyone else picked it up at 20, for instance. So then they've only had a couple of years. So he's at all those years getting good at weightlifting. So now all he's doing there is maintaining, getting a little bit stronger here and there, but he's now improving all of his other physical traits. And CrossFit is, even though a lot of people love the strength side of it, is so much more than strength. And that's it, the skill side. Everyone loves to, get a new rep max this and, lift the most amount of weight, but can they actually, do all these other skills? Bless you.
I muted it, mate.
Yeah, okay, there you go, yeah. And so when it comes to that, I think one of the reasons why we wanted to discuss that was because there's the common saying, I want to train like an athlete. And when people talk about they want to train like an athlete, it really does depend on what athlete you want to train like. 100%. And I think if you're looking at someone to be generally prepared for life, I think training like a CrossFit is great, which is why CrossFit has had such a huge impact on so many individuals' lives and, transformed them and taken them beyond wanting to just look good, but also, feel good, train for that performance. A lot of people kind of use that broad term, I'm eating to perform, and just eating too much, and just I've been a culprit of that. But it's in they're using that excuse essentially just to overconsume. Yeah. But something I wanted to touch on is maybe just the differences that some athletes may train. So you've already touched on golf. So why do you feel that maybe something like just doing CrossFit won't be good for improving golf, since it's good at improving your overall strength and fitness?
So I think it's just a very indirect way of going after the skill and sport-specific demands of golf. So the 10 general physical skills are a great list, but I think the issue I have with that is just almost lazy prescription of exercise is the relative importance of each of those physical skills will vary greatly depending on the sport. So coordination is a huge part of golf, but not a huge part of, say, rowing. So if you're saying CrossFit is a GPP, general physical preparedness program, and you dish it out to a rower and a golfer, their sports are so different. I can't see how you can argue that it's going to be optimal for either of them, because they're such different sports. So having an appreciation of the relative importance of the different physical skills, and at the very least, just allocating your training time in alignment with the relative importance of the physical skills in the sport. The other thing that needs to be said is the movements selected in CrossFit as well. Not many of them look very much like golf. So from a motor pattern point of view and a skill acquisition point of view, the carryover from snatching isn't going to be that great to a golf swing. And that was one of the issues I had with that golf world program, is that there's no rotation whatsoever. So if you're looking to get more powerful in a golf swing, you need to be doing movements that look at least a little bit like a golf swing. We're talking about this NFL player on a similar vein who he was a running back, and there's a great article online, I think on Sports Illustrated, where they said he inexplicably took up in his off season, and he came back 20 pounds lighter, which isn't a good thing if you're a running back, and slower, and then basically never got picked again. It kind of just ruined his athleticism, because he's spending a lot of time on different areas of fitness, which are valid areas of fitness, but they're not specific to his job in the football team. So he would have been much better off with a more traditional American football training program, which is very focused on the really explosive, short, intense work and the agility drills. Like, agility is a huge part for a running back, power and speed, and like endurance isn't a big deal for them. Like, plays go on for a matter of seconds, so him improving his 5K run time is going to have very little carryover. And because he's spending some of his training time working on those sorts of time domains, that time could have been spent on something a lot more sport specific. So GPP is great for a general athlete, but if you have a clear idea of how you want to improve and what your perfect athlete is, and it's not to be a CrossFitter, then some deviation away from a standard CrossFit program will benefit you, and you can dial into what those focuses are for you.
Yeah, I guess it's, when talking about that, it's like, so obviously with lockdown, and golf has become quite, like, I've noticed a lot more on Insta, like a lot of people playing golf, and it has now made me want to try it. I've always been, I haven't got the patience for it, but just when you see something so continuously, you're like, I kind of want to try it. Yeah. So, because I know I've been to the driving range, and, you know, you can just imagine me just trying to muscle that ball as far as I can, and, you know, getting the driver out, going for an absolute ping, and it doesn't actually go as far as I'd hoped, because I'm not proficient at that. I might be strong, but it shows that strength does not carry over to that. And my wife, Hannah, she's got a better golf swing than I have, because she understands the skill of it and how to actually hit the ball. Yeah. So it shows in the specific strength needed is clear.
There's a great example of this. There's a golf pro that I follow. He got Eddie Hall down to the range, who was the world's strongest man, and he couldn't hit the ball as far, and he couldn't swing the club as fast. So it shows you how a man kind of objectively established to be the strongest in the world at one stage in his life couldn't hit the ball as far in golf. So his strength wasn't specific. He could bench, squat, deadlift probably 4 times as much as this golf.
He had the heaviest deadlift in the world.
Exactly. So. But that doesn't count for anything on the driving range. Like, he could swing it hard-ish, but it wasn't, his club head speed wasn't that fast, and he couldn't hit the ball as far as this pro, who's not even like a tour player. So I thought that just perfectly illustrated how strength and general strength do not necessarily carry over to sport-specific strength. And you look at the guys who hit the ball a really long way in golf, they're not always the biggest guys with the biggest numbers in the gym. They're the guys with the best technique and strong in the right way for the sport. And that's why just like a general strength and conditioning program doesn't necessarily improve sporting performance.
Which is where, like, when I was going on the thing of lockdown, like with the golf, but we had the massive increase in running and cycling. So it's like, so I'm going to be releasing a cycling strength and conditioning program, but my strength and conditioning program is based around the things that you can't get from a bike. So not necessarily just about improving your strength and conditioning on the bike, but it's the fact that you're strengthening all the things that don't necessarily get used, or you're in a compromised position. So working a lot more posterior chain, you're bent over the bike in that position. So maybe working a little bit more your lower back, your midline, those type of things. But if you want to get good at, say, cycling, a lot of not the misconception, but is doing just a lot more single leg work, because obviously on a bike it's single. But at the same time, even though that obviously may have some carryover, it's probably as close as you can get to, say, cycling. The best way to get better at cycling is to cycle. And I know we've discussed that. And it's just like, if you want to get really good at hill climbs, don't just go and do some heavy single leg squats. Turn up, say, if you're on a bike, say a proper bike on a turbo trainer, go and turn up the resistance and just pedal as hard as you can for as long as you can to essentially get better at that. And don't get me wrong, there is obviously, you can get very specific to cycling to a degree, but cycling is the most specific you can be, because that's what your sport is. And same as with running, it's like you can definitely, and I know obviously Red Pill deal a lot with all the lunges and stuff for running, I know not just for running, but for strengthening runners. So you're putting yourself into, I've seen you do it on Insta. So do you want to just talk about that? So talk about how you wasn't necessarily doing these specific ones, and you added some in after talking to Jalsi, and then could you maybe talk about that and how that may have improved?
Oh yeah, so lunges at their simplest are exaggerated walking or running. It's still gait. If you do a walking lunge, the biomechanics are very similar to running. So as a means for strengthening yourself in a really relevant way to running, walking lunges are right up there with running. It's the same motor patterns, the same sequence of events in terms of when the foot hits the floor, these muscles activate and have to stabilize, and which is why they're such a great exercise. And in terms of correcting movement dysfunction or improving your movement efficiency, it's a great access to affect the way that your body works when running. So say you've got certain muscles that don't do enough when you run, or they do too much and need to be stretched off or released to some extent. By tweaking a lunge, you can teach the body that skill in a controlled environment, which will then carry over very well to running. Whereas if a lot of people will dish out corrective exercises where you're lying on the floor or in some sort of prone position, and it's a much bigger leap for your nervous system to bring that skill through into running than if you do it through a lunge. So that's one of the reasons why lunges are so functional, especially related to running, is it's a really natural movement that is very similar to the end goal. And in all sports where you're on your feet and running and changing direction, you can create lunges that basically mimic that. So if you're playing football or squash or something where you need to change direction, you can recreate the types of footwork that you need in that sport through lunges or lunge variations. And I think it was episode 2, the functional continuum one, that red pill concept. We're always trying to stay as close to the sport as we can. So lunging might be the access to get a certain muscle group working how we want it to. And then we might go to hopping, might go to skipping, and then jumping, or light jogging, and then sprinting, so that those improved mechanics get all the way through this full spectrum of running styles.
Yeah, so you found that to improve your running, though, obviously, say running would be one of the best, say, things to get better at running, because again, it's that continuous stress on the muscle for a duration. And like, if you want to get good at, say, 5K, you need to be on your feet for that similar sort of duration. You have to run a 5K, but your body has to, say, maybe done like 5 by 1,000, like, you know, so you're running that sort of time. Like,
Yeah.
Brad, one of our previous guests, he's about to do a massive charity run. And it was, I know it's a long way, and he's going around that 400-meter track. I can't remember, it's 500 or 600. I can't remember off the top of my head now. It's really annoying. But it's so. But one of the things he's as you heard on the previous episodes, he knows exactly what he's doing. You know, he's a well-seasoned coach in the running world. Yet he's just doing a lot of running. He does obviously a lot of the movement-specific stuff, but he does so much running, because at the end of the day, that's the stuff that's going to carry over to when he's doing his charity event. So it's what we wanted to get out of this part of the podcast is to make sure when you see any, say, strength and conditioning programs geared towards a specific sport, when you are looking through the movements, make sure that you can kind of in your head picture how they can carry across. Like, as an example, so I posted an Insta post the other day, which was about for cycling. Now, it was some goblet split squats with the front foot elevated and some kettlebell swings. So now for that, does that carry over to cycling? To a degree, yes. So my intention behind that was to, one, stretch out your hip flexors a little bit of the back leg. So stretch out the hip there, strengthen the front leg that's on there, because it had time under tension. So it was nice and slow tempo down and then explosive up. And then it was also challenging your midline by holding the goblet position with the weight in front of you. I then supersetted that with a kettlebell swing, a Russian one. So focusing on that power and all the posterior chain. Now, those two exercises may not be, say, they might not get someone better at, say, hill climbs or at, say, endurance on the bike. But what they may do is help their general day-to-day life. Like, for instance, being in that hunched over position on the bike, so strengthening their posterior chain will help them and their back feel better. So they're not necessarily just becoming so specific where their whole life is in a hunched over position. And that's what I know when you look at a lot of cyclists, a lot of them tend to get in that sort of position. And if you're a weekend warrior or someone that, you know, is passionate about cycling, you may then want to make sure you include a lot more of the GPP style movements in alongside your specific cycling needs. But if you're a professional athlete, a professional cyclist, you'll probably see a little less of those type of movements and a lot more just time in the saddle and varying your intensities through different resistances and so forth, because that's the stuff that's going to carry over.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to draw the listeners' attention to, is this question of what's the perfect athlete, or it's very in line with where do you want your training to take you, because if you do want to be the best cyclist in the world, you need to do a hell of a lot of cycling, and your general physical preparedness it's basically just what do you need to not get injured so that you can cycle as much as possible, versus if you're a recreational cycler or cyclist, even is the right way to say it, you probably don't want your body to only cycle, and you'd rather have a more broad range of physical skills available to you so that you don't have this hunched over position. Like, for a top end cyclist, you basically want your body to naturally be in the position of on the bike. So you want to be rounded over in the aero position and be exerting no effort to be there. And they'll probably have bad, like air quotes, bad posture compared to what most people would have as ideal posture, but that makes them better at cycling. So they've deliberately made that decision. I'm willing to trade off some general physical preparedness and probably be uncomfortable in some areas of normal life because I want to be the best cyclist in the world. But Joe Average, who goes for a 70k cycle on the weekend, he probably would rather feel better the other 6 days of the week than trade off his posture and, you know, have his body feel a bit bad in exchange for being a bit quicker on that one ride of the week. And having clear in your mind what your athletic ideals are and where you want your body to be means that you can answer those questions as to whether this training program is the right blend for you. And CrossFit, I think, having bashed on it a little bit this episode, is great because it, for most people, most of the time, it ticks a lot of boxes, and they'll feel generally fit and able to just rock up to any sport or activity better off than if they just did bodybuilding, or if they, you know, just did running. They're a much more rounded athlete. But the caveat is, if you know that your priority is golf, or your priority is squash, or your priority is football, your training time is better invested working on those sports than working on general physical skills, which perhaps aren't as important in your sport.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And it's just, I think the understanding, as you say, training like an athlete, it depends on what type of athlete you want to be, which is exactly what you've just said there. So understanding, if you are, say, just passionate about some of these sports, then maybe you want to even throw some, you know, specific stuff into your general perfect, which is at the end of the day how you can get better indirectly. So, you know, you might want to do some of these, say with the golf. So with golf, you don't really see much rotation in CrossFit at all, and you might be a CrossFitter, right? So what you might want to do is add, I'm actually going to add some rotation in rather than doing kipping pull-ups, right? So I'm going to now create a little bit more movement like that, or I'm going to maybe, instead of doing American kettlebell swings, I might actually have them coming more from an angle. So because I know I've seen you, like, so you have got a little bit of that rotation, or even anti-rotation. So you're actually fighting against the resistance, not necessarily that's the golf carryover, but it's the thing about rotation. And there's nothing wrong with adding elements into your training to get a little bit better at the sport. And that's because you're not looking necessarily to be the best in the world. Because if you do, as with any sport, bar CrossFit, is you to get the best in the world at a specific sport, you're going to put yourself into a compromised position. I think you've identified that with the NFL player, with golfers, all these, so cyclists we've discussed, like, you have to become compromised in your day-to-day life to become the best, which is why you are the best, which is then probably why you don't do it for your life. You do it for your competitive period. And then outside of that, you see a lot of these cyclists, or say golfers. Well, golfers you can kind of play until you're like an old man, but maybe at the competitive level, maybe not. So I don't know enough about golf, but I know there's some great old geezers and ladies playing it. But for me, I just think if you're looking to just be generally well prepared, I think, as you have said, CrossFit is a great mode of training because it gets you prepared for life. And that's, I think, what a lot of people, especially when they're coming from a bit more, say, a bodybuilding background, this is where, as you said, those benefits can really stand out. Yeah. So we wanted to just touch on that perfect athlete. And as I think pretty much every single episode we kind of discuss is always, it depends. Yeah. And that's what a lot of fitness is. But we wanted to add a little bit more of a specific idea behind that it depends, and maybe for what we thought. And for me, when you look at these top athletes, it's, you know, they seem to have the life. For a lot of the time you think, cool, just imagine what it'd be to train, like, eat, sleep, you know, have your life focused on that. But you hear a lot of, like, the stories that it's quite boring, and, you know, it's quite a sad life, because, you know, you're so focused, because you have to be, on just performing that sport and becoming essentially worse off in life in a way.
Yeah, I think it's the same principle as what we're saying about the training. Is there's trade-offs to be made. Like, you have to sacrifice. So if you want to be the greatest golfer, you won't have the heaviest deadlift. And if you want to be the best sportsman, you probably won't have the most active social life. You won't, you know, you don't get the same luxuries of or being able to travel during the season. Like, if you
can't have your cake and eat it, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. If you want to be the best or great at anything, there are trade-offs. And in The Last Dance, Michael Jordan, they're asking him, like, do you think that your teammates thought you were a nice guy? And he was actually he choked up a little bit, and he was like, you know, they might not have liked me, and there's a price to pay for being a winner and for being a leader, and that's that not everyone can like you all of the time. And he was aware of that trade-off. He was just like, I know that I can't be Mr. Popular and have everyone on my side all the time, if I want to get the most out of this team, I have to be hard on them. And sometimes I have to sort of get them out of their comfort zones and make them, like, fire them up. And sometimes that takes pissing them off, and sometimes that takes being rude or unlikable. But that's why they were the best team ever. That's one of the reasons why they were so successful. And yeah, if you try and you can't have your cake and eat it, like you just said.
That's the thing, and I think this also then applies to life as well. Just the thing of, you can't please everyone, and I think as soon as you kind of get over that initial hurdle and you try to be Mr. Great or Mrs. Great for everyone, and you just focus on just being you. That's a lot of the time you're gonna have some people like it and some people don't, and that is what it is, and you shouldn't let it bother you. And I think that just obviously comes into full circle with all of this. But guys, I hope you really enjoyed today. I think this discussion was quite a fun one for us, especially discussing about athletes and so forth and what we think. As always, we're on all the classic platforms. If you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, please share our episodes. If you do enjoy them, please give us a review, all the usual stuff. And thanks a lot for listening. We really appreciate your time, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Cheers, guys.